Is there any hope for this computer whatsoever?
The wacky world of MultimediaJay.
Here's the project area, and here's Tuxedo, my former main system. The CPU is an AMD Phenom 2 1090T 6-core from 2010, and the graphics card is a GTX 760 from 2012, 2013-ish. Bottom line, this thing represents what the early 2010s had to offer, and nowadays it's not good. I'm used to computers becoming obsolete because they're slow. This computer doesn't compete with Monolith on speed, but more importantly, it doesn't compete with Monolith on efficiency. Not even close. I got the new version of NovaBench that came out very recently. It's now patterned more like an app than the old school Windows program that it was for years with that 800 by 600 graphics test. But just sitting here, look, 150 watts to 170 watts. If the processor stops doing background tasks or something, it might drop down to 98 watts, but a total disaster and a power hog in terms of even with the power saving features turned on the processor. Oh, okay, now it's going down to the 93. Lucky. Of course, Monolith and even the new Delosaurus get far better numbers than this. Yay! Oh, and something's running in the background that makes it flirt with the 100-watt mark, but yeah, it's a mess. What I want to know, though, is there any hope for Tuxedo whatsoever in the efficiency department? It is not going to win on speed, ever. But I'm curious just how much of a hippie computer I can make this thing. Hey, green computing is totally my thing these days. I mean, why have a computer sucking wattage when it's not hardly doing anything? I mean, desktops have been embarrassed by laptops long enough. And when the drives start shutting off, then we might go down around 90 watts or so. But yeah, this thing only has one drive, I think. I have what, an SSD and a hard drive, right? Yes, a single hard drive and an SSD running the system. So, bare minimum in terms of computery stuff. But yeah, so we're going to take this machine, and we're going to bring over the Delosaurus, which smoked it last year, right after, roughly a month after I bought a new motherboard for this darn thing. And then let's see if a more efficient graphics card can do anything whatsoever to lower these numbers a bit. Because I am curious, this is pre-Maxwell we're talking about with a graphics card here. Can we getting rid of that 760 in favor of something cheap with today's technology? Do something about how using this machine for everyday tasks outside of gaming is like driving a Greyhound bus to the store for a loaf of bread. Let's see. By the way, if you hear any banging and clanging and heavy metal type sounds, one of the neighbors is going full-on construction mode to clean yard debris out of his yard. He's got his buddy with a full-size dump truck over there. He absolutely wants to make sure that he does this all in one trip. Come on, NovaBench. Alright, so we got CPU, and it's basically like a Metro app nowadays compared to the old Windows-y type thing. The big thing I'm curious about, though, is how high does the power go? I've seen this thing clear the 300-watt mark, so CPU doesn't seem to be bumping it too much. I'll bet any money the graphics card is where a lot of the power draw comes from. But the CPU's garbage. I mean, this thing was made to compete with the original generation Core i7, which was nowhere near as power efficient as the Sandy Bridge that replaced it. So, in a way, I really got scorched big time in terms of being burned by building this system just before a new standard setter chip from Intel came out. Alright, we're testing the discs now, and of course that doesn't draw a lot of... Oh, here we go. The new NovaBench graphics test is 720p. And here we go, 310 watts, da-da-da-da-da. So I know it's like 100-something when it's not doing anything too big, but then it clears the 300 mark when it starts doing any kind of graphical rendering. And I wonder why my $100 electricity bills went down to $80 electricity bills when I when I got this thing. Oh, and there's a little bit of a rebalancing of the scores going on here. So this machine gets 1474 in Nova Bench, whereas previously it got like 1200, 1300 and stuff like that. And I'm not even overclocking it. This thing's running at stock clocks. 3.2 gigahertz standard, 3.6 turbo. Basically, I'm done overclocking this thing because I could overclock the heck out of it and it won't even hold a candle to Monolith. It's just not that significant in terms of significant digits. So, 1474, 602 on the CPU, which is good, because usually this thing gets like a 570 or something, and then 635 with the GPU. So remember these numbers for later. RAM, 8 gigs, the original RAM that I got for it way back in 2010, 161, disk score, 76. Let's remember these numbers and get the Dellosaurus over here, and of course I've done a few tests in the run-up to all of this, and it's actually previous test results get saved until you upload them to the internet. So it's cool that you can run a few tests and see what the range is. But it looks like the numbers have been kind of rebalanced. Now let's bring over the Dellosaurus and embarrass the living daylights out of this thing. And just like that, all the neighborhood noise is gone, because it's the middle of the night. Hashtag night shift privileges, baby. So, let's bust out the Dellosaurus here. This is a Dell Optiplex 990, picked it up last year. Retired corporate tower, Sandy Bridge i7. Basically the oldest computer that I would want to basically have in the role of the Dellosaurus these days. Basically seeing how far I can make an old computer just stay relevant and stuff. Quad-core, 8-thread, Sandy Bridge i7 from 2011, paired up with a 1050 Ti and 16 gigs of DDR3. So, do as much as I can with this retail conversion before actually upgrading something and crossing over into the realm of more, homebrew PC. So let's see here. This is the absolute spoiler that totally pulled the rug out from under Tuxedo. Because here we are with the same kind of configuration, about to start Nova Bench, one hard drive and one SSD, and yet this thing bottoms out in the 20s for wattage when nothing's running. This thing is greener. Oh, now something's happening again and it's actually moving a little. But this thing actually will have its watt meter drop below that of Tuxedo. Of course it will. Of course it will beat Tuxedo. But this thing will have the watt meter go below the minimum wattage for Monolith, which is why I was goofing around with those smaller drives last year to try and bring the minimum wattage down. That's the weak point of desktops, is that compared to laptops, when doing things that are not desktop specific, desktops are nowhere near as efficient. So that's basically what my focus has been. Getting a system that can crank up when it needs to crank up, and then take it easy when it has to take it easy. Simple. Except it's kind of hard. It's just, well, that's another story entirely. Let's start Nova Bench and see what kind of numbers we get. So we got this, and targeted tests, bringing the processor up towards the 100-watt mark, but I think the TDP on the graphics card is actually less. So once we get to something involving graphics, we'll see some stuff here. So anyways, yeah. I'm also curious as to how Monolith would run if I put a 1050 Ti in it, like from this thing. But one thing at a time here. So 50 watts. So as you can see, it's embarrassing the living daylights out of Tuxedo. I don't know though, I think it might be some combination of the processor and the graphics card that's causing the problems that it's having. Oh, we finally cracked the 100-watt mark. Here comes the RAM. The graphics is when it's really gonna go really high, so there we go. 720p being rendered, 82, 86, 130, 129, 131, 129, 131, 132. We're not even cracking 200 watts. And this thing has stronger gaming performance than Tuxedo. So, again, and we're getting 100 frames a second for, well, at least I caught it before the graphic test ended. Here it is, Nova Bench score 1800, the processor is at 785, the GPU is at 700, so it's better than the two 6s with Tuxedo, 16 gigs, 235 for RAM, 80 for the disk score, but there you go. I mean, in terms of secondary systems, the Dellosaurus is totally it. I don't know if a more efficient graphics card will really help out Tuxedo in terms of making it relevant again. I think I have to just live with the fact that efficiency beginning in the 2010s, after the initial generation of i7s, has just been so much more of a thing since then, between this Sandy Bridge system and my Skylake main system. Can't believe graphics cards can be these cutesy little things with just one fan these days. I think I can get some other models of these things in this kind of form factor. Anyways, yeah, Delosaurus is back to integrated graphics. The sad remains of this old thing. Start playing that Madonna "This Used to Be My Playground" song or something like that. However you want to get sentimental about all of this. But yeah, this used to be my main system and it got embarrassed when I picked up the new Delosaurus last year. Got it working with the original 8 gigs of RAM that it once had, but it's got this nice Darth Vader motherboard, big aftermarket cooling. It's got support for this is a 140 fan actually in the back. I hack job support in, but now it's flush, so I lost the hinge and I have to use the thumb screws to keep the case closed. And here's our target right here, the 760 Power Hog graphics card. Out with the beast. Such a nice looking graphics card too. Hard to believe it's 5 years old and a power hog and not very good in terms of performance nowadays. Better than nothing, but that's about it. Alright, Hippie Tuxedo is ready to go with the 1050 Ti and all the other hack job stuff. Let's plug it back in, fire it up, wait for the computer to stop going nuts because the graphics card has changed, and see how much better, worse, different, whatever it is, the Nova Bench scores have gotten. Hippie Tuxedo in 3, 2, 1. Postcode? Anything? Spin up noise. What the heck happened? I have a different graphics card.
Epic fail.
You can't teach an old dog new tricks. Even with a more efficient graphics card, this thing is adamantly not going below the 80s in terms of wattage. So that means that a lot of the power sucking is still coming from that 1090T. It's just amazing how much difference 1 year made. Yeah, I could spend over $100 on an 8320E to throw it into this motherboard because it's AM3 Plus now and not just AM3, but what's the point? This is the tertiary system. That Delosaurus I picked up, Sandy Bridge and all, is tons and tons better than this thing, with both speed and efficiency. It's off the charts. And all of that because of one single year. 1 year made all the difference. And of course AMD kind of falling behind on everything to the point where the only way they still sold chips was to sell them cheaply. But even then, if you bought a cheap chip and then paid for it in power and whatnot, of course Tech Syndicate guys did the math on this. But you consider, this is a nearly 10-year-old CPU. It dates back to 2010. I first installed it in late 2010. We're coming up on 10 years. If it does take years to make up for a more, a less efficient, to make up the power difference and whatnot, if there is years involved in that equation, this is coming due to the point where it's going to get more expensive, simply because of the power draw. So I think Tuxedo should remain a period piece, so to speak, for how computers were in the early 2010s, and then we'll just see how long it stays relevant before finally retiring it, like the Core 2 Duo machine and whatnot. Or even the single-core 2005 system I still have for some strange reason. So, let's cool it with all of this, and put the old graphics card back in this thing, because I'm just done wasting time trying to make this thing more efficient. Power Hog it is. This thing is a product of its time. A time before all this crypto mining nonsense. It's just amazing how far computers have gone over the span of this previous decade. This current decade. I'm staying up too late recording these things now.
Epic fail.
The 760 is back, and Tuxedo is back to being a product of its time. hovering around the 100-watt mark. This thing can probably still play something, but why on earth would I want to use this for gaming anymore? It's just, the Delosaurus just absolutely just supersedes this thing in everything. Still is a curiosity piece as to how far computers have gone in the last several years. It did, however, take this garbage out of the Delosaurus, the stuff that was in the back for, I don't know, over by the slots and everything. I don't need this stuff to short out the motherboard if it gets too fleeky. Either or, the systems are all back together now, and we can continue with whatever does what. Till next time, this is MultimediaJay, signing off. Thanks for stopping by.